You're listening to Achtung Millwall, broadcasting from the beautiful South Birmingham. Accept no substitute.
Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to Achtung Millwall. This is another edition of Nick and Neil's Millwall History Hour. And joining me is my compadre, Mr. Neil Fissler. How you doing, Neil?
Good afternoon, Nick. I almost said good evening. It's that dark outside at 4 in the afternoon.
Autumn is dawning, probably rain the other day, and summer is now a distant memory. The cricket season is long gone. But, dear listeners, we are going to do another of our looks back into the past, if that makes any sense. But we're going to be reviewing the fixtures for October, Neil, the beginning of autumn. And first up on Saturday, we have an away trip to Barnsley, which is always seems like a grim trip to me. Barnsley, it's one of those. It's an odd place. It's actually quite a nice stadium when you get there, but it always seems grimmer than it maybe it actually is.
Mate, Barnsley is one of those places where you can't wait to get back out and back on the train to London, isn't it? Yeah, well, let's be honest. Have you ever been there and it's been a nice, bright, sunny day? I think every time I've ever been there, it's been pissing down with rain. And
well, this is it. I went there 2017-ish, and it was March, and it was actually snowing there. It was like late March. You think this ought to be getting towards summertime now, and it was snowing. It was really, really cold. So Barnsley versus Millwall, Neil. We're looking back at fixtures from the past and matters related, listeners. So I've chosen the fixture here, Neil, which was a win. In fact, I did see a win in 2017, and this is another win from January 1991, a 2-1 win for the Lions at Barnsley. And this would be under the reign of Bruce Rioch, 1990-91, our first season back in Division 2 after the brief supernova of our first division days.
Yeah, I think it's quite safe to say that we were going through a bit of a change, weren't we?
We were.
The winds of change and
Bruce Rioch. I mean, I'm off on a tangent now. This is just how this show rolls, listeners. But Bruce Rioch, I always found him an intriguing manager because he had this, and the players I know didn't take to him. He had a fairly militaristic kind of persona. But the football that he aspired to and the players that he picked were quite creative and quite, I suppose nowadays you call them continental style, beautiful game style players. It was an odd contrast, Rioch, I found.
Yeah, Rioch was one of those people where he was a sergeant major type, wasn't he?
Yeah, shirt and tie.
But it was a kind of bloke. It's either my way or the highway, and I think he's probably quite easy to rub people up the wrong way.
Oh, I think I would have hated him. I can't imagine working for him. Every story I've heard about Bruce Rioch, I think I would have rowed with him immediately because he just isn't. But I as a fan, I remember it was. I mean, Mick McCarthy would bring his players to pass as playing some of the best football I think I've ever seen from a Millwall side, 93, 92 kind of era. But it was the creation of Bruce Rioch. It was just he couldn't manage, I don't think.
Yeah, no, well, you look at the side and he had some great Millwall players and he had generally some pretty good players.
Absolutely. I'll just run through the starting 11 for this 2-1 win against Barnsley, 12th of Jan 1991, in front of just under 8,000 at Oakwell. And the bones of the classic side, really. Neil Brian Horn in goal, Ian Dawes, backline, Steve Wood, Alan McCleary, Keith Stevens. Midfield, Les Briley and Gary Waddock. Hurdock having moved on, of course, towards the latter part of the First Division days. But Waddock was a decent midfielder. Maybe not a Millwall player, but a decent midfielder.
Republic of Ireland under 20. The Republic of Ireland international.
Yes, he was.
Quite a lot with QPR.
Yes, a skillful player. Wasn't a Millwall player, and that's that hard to define thing. Then on either side, you've got Alex Ray, who is a classic player, wonderful player, and Paul Stevenson, who was the winger that famously scored the goal at Anfield in our trip to Liverpool in that first season. And up front, two fantastic players, Neil. Teddy Sheringham, who needs no introduction, and John Goodman, who we'd signed from Bromley. £30,000
And I think you've actually missed off. Yeah, did you mention that Les Briley played in that game?
in midfield. Yeah, it's Waddock and Briley in midfield. Briley was a
John
great
Goodman, tremendous signing. One hell of a signing, wasn't he, John Goodman? And we picked him up for a song, and I think it's another player that we almost signed accidentally.
Yeah, I think he did. He join us under Rioch, or was it John Doherty? I can't remember now, but he certainly came to us. He came to the fore in this season, 1990-91, and there he is starting alongside Teddy.
It was signed in that August, so it must have been a Rioch signing. Yeah.
To sign a player from Bromley, non-league Bromley, obviously, for 30,000, which wasn't. I suppose it was a moderate fee for the times, but you just wouldn't do that nowadays. You wouldn't pitch a player straight in from non-league straight into the Championship, and he hits the ground literally running because he was a very pacey forward, John Goodman, wasn't he?
Yeah, funnily enough, he much the same way as Neil Harris. He made that step up almost effortlessly.
Absolutely.
And interestingly, he'd actually never played for Bromley.
Had he not? No, I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
Bromley signed him from Leighton Wingate, I believe.
Wow, there's a name from the past.
Yeah. And
okay,
I think he'd been a youngster at West Ham.
Right.
And I'm cheating here. Actually, I'm reading from the Millwall.
Reveal your secrets, Fissler. This is how we present an image.
Yeah, and he didn't ever actually play for Bromley. I
didn't know that.
We must have played him in a pre-season game or something like that, I presume. Or somebody had wandered into Bromley one day and saw him playing a pre-season friendly and thought, he'll do for us.
Absolutely. Obviously the up front we'd lost Cascarino the previous season as the wheels were coming off of our classic first division side. Sheringham, amazingly, by modern standards, had stayed on with us and would actually go on to a record-breaking 38 goals scored from 55 appearances in the second tier. Teddy Sheringham, which is incredible. And it is incredible he stayed, and then he performed incredibly in that division that season.
Yeah, no, I can remember John Goodman's goal scoring. Always thought had it in him.
Absolutely. Known, nicknamed Elvis by the Millwall crowd on account of his dark locks on his head. He made 110 appearances for the Lions between 1990 and 1994. He stayed with us quite a while, actually. I didn't realise he'd stayed that long, 4 years. 110 appearances, Neil, 17 as sub, and scored 37 goals. That's a pretty decent return from 110 appearances.
It's a very good return, and I think he was part of that wrath of players that went from Millwall to Wimbledon, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was sold in. The club was in financial difficulties. When is it ever not in financial difficulties? And we sold Kenny Cunningham and John Goodman as a joint deal. It seems cheap even now, but for 1.3 million for two fantastic players in their different ways. Kenny Cunningham was a great defender, and John Goodman played in this game. Was a great striker, a very fast, speedy player. I must admit, when we signed John Goodman, I remember wondering what we were going to get up front, because although Teddy had stayed, I wondered whether Teddy would actually perform. Whether he needed his Cascarino, so to speak, to perform. But he gave us the answer this season, didn't he, with 38 goals.
Yeah, absolutely. You're quite rightly, despite the fact he's been a fan of every club he's ever signed for, which I don't think went down too well when he signed for that mob across the river.
No. I think
he seems to have taken on the pantomime villain whenever he appears at Millwall.
I find that wow. I think if you're a fan that didn't live through these days, then maybe that's your. Maybe it's easier to fall into that trap. I think I can forgive Teddy Sheringham a lot for those days, the 88 to 90 period, and then to score 38 goals for us in a season is it's old school. It harks back to the 1930s type strikers, Neil, that we talk about sometimes. Some of
Yeah,
the greats.
and I think we're going to talk about one or two strikers coming up.
Absolutely. So this finished 2-1 to Millwall, 1-0 to Barnsley on 15 minutes. I think is that Steve Agnew? Might
Yes.
be Steve Agnew for 15 minutes. One each just a few minutes later from a Teddy penalty on 19 minutes, and then a decisive strike just before half time by Alex Ray in the 39th minute for 2-1. And Mill boss Bruce Rioch admitted after the game it's a hard-earned point. We had to weather the storm. So you're weathering a storm in Barnsley. It takes a man to do that, I'll tell you that much. There we are. So that's the first of our series of fixtures for October. Now, next up, Neil, I've picked up when I was actually I was at this game. It's a strange thing, listeners, when your life becomes history, because I was at Millwall 4, Luton Town 2 in 1976, and there is coverage of this on YouTube, and I recommend anyone. I'll stick the link in the show notes when we put it out, because it was featured on the big match, and I well remember going along to Coldblow Lane, and we never used to have a TV gantry, and so I had to erect a scaffold on the halfway line, which could be shaken by fans at the base. They could shake it and wobble the thing. And sometimes you'll see some of the old camera work looks a bit bouncy. It's because they're on a scaffold.
Because we're trying to bring down Brian Moore.
Well, he was always a friend to Millwall. He always seemed to be a friend, but he used to get some torrid abuse when he had to walk through the crowd to get to a ladder that would enable him to climb up the scaffold gantry, which had to be erected whenever the cameras came. It didn't come that often. It was always ITV, very rarely BBC, but ITV more commonly. And so, yeah, the big match footage is online. Well worth a look. Great game. The dingy den floodlights as the game wore on, because it was now in the onset of winter in November 1976. And a great team that took the field that day. No substitutions in this game, Neil. I'm going to read their names out, if I may. That's Ray Goddard in goal. Then you've got a back line of Dave Donaldson, Barry Kitchener, Tony Hazel. Ray Evans, that was a wonderful player, Ray Evans.
Time from Tottenham.
Yeah, very classy player. Midfield of Terry Brisley and Phil Walker, we've spoken to previously on this show. Then Trevor Lee's on the right side, and Terry Shanahan, a player I'd forgotten until I looked at YouTube. That's the wonder of the internet. Terry Shanahan played as a winger. Very dark eyes, a kind of seemed to have eyes in cheekbone type look, you know. John Seesman up front, a great striker for the Lions. And a player I'd completely forgotten, completely erased, Chris Harris from my memory banks, but he played just 3 times that season for the Lions. No substitutions in this game. That was the starting 11 that started and finished it. Well worth a look. I don't know if you ever check out some of these old footages on YouTube. No, it's lots and lots to be gleaned on YouTube. Old games, and it's wonderful to look at this stuff.
Yeah, no, it's always quite good to get to actually go down that rabbit hole, isn't it? Of
absolutely
big match live. Actually, Chris Harris is quite a nice guy. I've spoken to him a few times.
Really? I'd forgotten he played for us, mate. I've completely forgotten him.
Well, he was an apprentice stonemason who was on the verge of signing for Millwall.
Right, okay.
Was actually on the verge of signing for Brighton, when Millwall stepped in for him.
Right.
It was actually a Gordon Jago signing.
Okay.
And opted to sign for us because we were in a higher division than Brighton at the time. And his father was actually John Harris, who played for Leeds and Halifax, and his uncle Bill Harris was actually a Welsh international. So there was a lot of pedigree there. Came from Hastings area. Okay. We signed him from Bexhill.
A great name. I mean, it wasn't until I looked at the footage and compiled the team list. It came back to me, but it just gone from my head, as happens to you as you advance through the years, listeners. But one player who wasn't gone from my mind, and I picked him out just to touch on him. I don't think we've mentioned John Seesman enough in previous shows, if we've mentioned him on this, Neil. But he was a wonderful ray of hope in some tough times at the Den. Let's be honest. The 76 to 80, John Seesman played for us, and those were difficult days to be a Millwall fan. But Seesman was one of our strikers. You always look forward to seeing him. 184 appearances for the Lions, 1976 to 1980. 2 as sub and 41 goals. An intelligent player, John. I always used to think. I always look forward to seeing him play for us.
Yeah, somebody I don't think gets recognised, does he? We've certainly never spoken about him.
No.
I don't think he's one of those players, an unfashionable player, pretty much at the time, wasn't he? Did we sign him from Chesterfield or somewhere like
Luton.
that?
We signed from Luton for £10,000 in April 76. That would have been Gordon Jago's era still. The 76-77 season was a highly enjoyable period. For the most part, the 70s were tough times to be a Millwall fan, but Jago actually got us playing some good football. There's some wonderful games. We beat Chelsea 3-0, and that's another YouTube game that you can find, listeners, if you want to check that out. I was there for that one, and these were big moments that made a big impression on me as a young Millwall fan.
Was a member of the side that claimed promotion in '76 from Division 3, and I think he played quite a key part in that side.
He was he sold in tough times. Again, we're back on tough times, tough financial times. Sold in another joint deal like we did with John Goodman and Kenny Cunningham. This one was with Tony Towner and John Seesman, sold in a joint £185,000 signing for Rotherham in August 1980, and that gives you a measure of the club's difficulties as the 70s became the 80s. The financial difficulties of the club. We're lucky to still be here, listeners. But he's a much travelled striker, John Seesman, Neil. But certainly the biggest contribution of his career was with Millwall. 184 appearances. 2 as sub and 41 goals. That was 76 to 80. He played for Rotherham 100 times after that in the early 80s. But he's been around the houses: Cardiff, Rochdale, Chesterfield, Tranmere, Northwich, Victoria, Nullington, non-leagues, Accrington and Hyde.
You claimed a 3rd division title with Rotherham and a 4th division title with Chesterfield. So he was obviously a player with some ability.
Some intelligence. And I found, I don't know if it was him, someone called John Seesman was on LinkedIn operating as a football agent. I presumed it to be John.
Yeah, no, it is the same one.
Same chap. Born in 1955, he's now 66. And you got it right there, Neil. He's underrated and not mentioned very often. So it's a nice chance to actually mention John, because he was one of my favourites in the 70s, and he certainly made for some wonderful memories from that time. As I said, a tough time generally for the Lions. Some other great names in there. I mean, we've spoken with Trevor Lee and Phil Walker. They were wonderful players, Neil. Trevor in his own kind of, he had a Paul Ifill style of attacking wing play, which sometimes you wonder how he kept the ball with his arms and legs were everywhere, but somehow he got through. And Phil Walker was a very, very silky midfielder. Our first, well, not quite our first players of colour, but certainly the first ones that I knew of as a Millwall fan at this time.
Yeah, but Pearson, I think, was our first one in the very early 70s.
Yeah.
But no, considering the club had a reputation at the time for being slightly right wing, they were 2 players that really won the hearts and minds of everybody down at Millwall. And yeah, but it shows that I can remember they couldn't find Trevor Lee for a very long time.
I think he had his problems. I think he
was looking after his sister and things like that.
Yeah.
And I can remember the first game he came back for, and apparently he said to people, "Will they remember me?" and he came out on the pitch, and the place erupted.
Yeah, I will never forget him. The same with Phil Walker. These were great players.
Absolutely superb players. And this was quite a decent team. It really was. Ray Evans, a good player. Dave Donaldson.
Yeah, great defender.
Got from Arsenal and
Goddard in goal. Decent goalkeeper.
And funnily enough, I think the other week I mentioned about Bart Biakowski probably being in our top 3.
Yeah.
And it sparked a debate on Twitter like it always does. And somebody actually mentioned Ray Goddard, and it's one of those steady goalkeepers that you don't automatically. You sit back and you think, and you think of your Stepneys, your Brian Kings, your Casey Kellers, Brian Horn, Bart Biakowski, but Ray Goddard is somebody who doesn't really get remembered.
No, well, he'd stepped into some big boots, to get my metaphor correct, some big football boots in Brian King, who had left us for Coventry. I think that was in 75 that Brian left us. So the goalkeeper that followed, a great, a player that should have played at a very high level, international level, I think. A player that stepped into his shoes, always had a hard gig. But Ray Goddard, I think he'd come from Orient, Neil, I believe, hadn't he? Was he an ex-Orient goalkeeper, I believe?
Yeah, I think he played in a couple of promotion-winning sides for Orient. Certainly went on, I think, did he play for Wimbledon at some point as well? Won a fourth division or won a promotion with them.
Don't know.
Ended up living in Spain, running a bar, cleaning pools. Unfortunately, died at quite a young age. But quite an interesting fact about this game is, apart from it being on my birthday, November the 13th,
no, there we are.
And the birthday I share with that Emma Raducanu shares with me.
That's such a flimsy link to the stars.
I'll tell you what, you were being born on the same day as me is the greatest honour of her life. Don't worry about winning the US.
Forget the US Open.
But you actually look at that Luton team. They went 1-0 up through Alan West.
Yeah, Millwall player later on, wasn't he? Yeah.
And Brian Chambers was at the back for them, and somebody who also had a spell at Millwall.
Very solid midfield player, Brian Chambers, another name from my youth. I believe Peter Anderson was playing for them as well. Whether he was playing that on this occasion or not, but it was in that era, and he would go on to mixed reviews as Millwall manager later on in his career.
Don't have one bone about him, for God's sake.
He's now an IT guru, isn't he, in America?
Mate, he made a lot of money, Peter Anderson. He really did. He ended up running all kinds of companies. He's somebody I'd quite like to get onto a history show.
Yeah, maybe we can pursue him. Yeah.
Hopefully, he doesn't listen to anything first.
We might have plotted our copybook there, but let's see what we can find out. But no, wonderful game. 4-2. Some late winners for the Lions. I think it was 2 each coming into the late part of the game. And I was there, dear listeners, and I remember
very rare goal for Barry Kitchener.
And a great goal. Buried it from on the left. Normally you'd associate Kitch with a header, but this was actually put away with like the aplomb of a top striker, Neil.
And Terry Brisley scored. And we talk about players that are almost forgotten. Terry Brisley, I know he pops up down the den every now and again.
He was a good player, good midfielder, like another Orient player, wasn't he?
I think he was part of that little group.
Yeah, Barry Fairbrother.
Barry Fairbrother was the name I was looking for then, and
who was less successful, but it was always Brisley was a very willing and chirpy is the right, so it doesn't really work in a football context, but he had that kind of buzz about him in midfield. Chirpy is the best word I can come up with as I'm speaking, dear listeners. So there we are. So John Seesman, member of that Millwall side that beat Luton 4-2. Do check it out. I'll stick the link for the YouTube footage on the show notes when we go out.
Achtung, Millwall.
So moving along, Neil, I've dug back into the past. And I think this is great minds meeting, like Bertrand Russell meeting up with Wittgenstein and coming up with the same fixture. Sheffield United 3, Millwall 1. Played on the 2nd of February, 1895. I don't remember that one, Neil. Do you?
Yeah, but I remember it like it was yesterday. No, obviously not.
No, it was a big cup game for the Lions at this juncture. Millwall would have been Millwall Athletic, I suppose we should call them, because that would have been the correct name for the Dockers at this time. Was playing on the Isle of Dogs. They would have been, I believe, at the Athletic Ground at this stage, which was now the site of Asda on near Cross Harbour Station. If you're working in that area, although this was played actually at Bramall Lane. I'm going off on a tangent. This is played at Bramall Lane in the FA Cup first round. And I've got a report here.
Yeah, it was. I think Sheffield United were probably one of the best teams around at the time, and certainly if you look at the team, Rab Howells was, just to fill people in, was the first Romany gypsy, I believe, to play for England.
He was, and there's again, I'll stick the link in the show notes because there's a great article on the BBC website from 2014 now about Rab Howells. He has various names: Robert Rabbi, not Rabbi, but Rabbi, I think Howell, making history as it's puts here as the first Romany player to play for England. And he played. He was born in I don't know what the politically correct term is. I'm going to call him a gypsy camp because I think that's what I was brought up to call them. Or there may be travellers now. I don't know what the right term is. He's listed as a gypsy camp in Sheffield, and he's possibly born in a tent. They say, Neil.
Yeah, that must have been an incredibly harsh existence.
Absolutely.
In the 1860s, 1870s, when he was born, Christ Almighty,
born in a tent, and went on to earn a living as a miner. Well, coal mining was not exactly a laughing party then. He showed talent as on the football field, playing in central defence, earning his first professional contract with Sheffield United, which would take us into this particular loss for Millwall at Sheffield. They went on to join Liverpool in 1898, just before Sheffield United were crowned league champions. Apparently, he had a somewhat scandalous private life. Possibly a young lady was put in the family way by him, and Sheffield United went to some lengths, it says here, to keep that said scandal quiet. Eventually, a broken leg would end his footballing career in 1903. It was often referred to as the gypsy in the papers. I mean, the papers then were quite forthright in descriptions.
Yeah, but they weren't exactly politically correct, were they?
No, they weren't. No, but there's a great photo of Rabbi Howell in his England shirt. He's named by the national side in 1895 in a 9-0 victory over Ireland. And he was capped a second time in 1899. One of the reasons for his lack of England caps, as they put it here quite discreetly, was that football had they describe it as a sentimental attitude to gentlemen players, and that Rabbi Howell was not a gentleman, born in a tent just outside Sheffield, having worked as a coal miner from gypsy background. And it says class was a very strong thing, and it may be more class-based than any footballing considerations. And there's a campaign here to promote his name, and a remarkable story. I think is probably the best way we can put it on this show, Neil.
They probably want him. Yeah, they probably want him to get a retrospective England cap now.
Posthumous.
There's all kinds of things that go around these days. But actually, the goalkeeper's quite an interesting character in that game as well. Fatty Falk.
Fatty Falks. This is a famous name. 21 stone, was he?
Something like that.
I mean, imagine that. I mean, goalkeepers then were big men, weren't they? They were there to physically impose themselves on the play as much as doing any kind of less emphasis on cat style goalkeeping and more on physical presence.
Yeah, they'd just smash people out of the way, wouldn't they? I think, for the want of a better word. Yeah. But also, I think they were in danger of putting their head in where it hurts. And and you can imagine the likes of Rabbi wouldn't have...
was no stranger to that. No.
Yeah, wouldn't actually have hesitated in taking a head off, would he? I mean,
we obviously it has its amusing side now from the perspective of 2021. But when you read the life story of Rabbi Howell there, for example, and he was, men of that time, working class guys of that time, they had it hard, and no one was going to do them a favour. So you had to be willing to make it happen. You know, no one was going to give you anything there, Neil, were they?
No, exactly. And you say people weren't, and if you looked at that Millwall side, the majority of them would have been on the island, living on the island, which
True, yeah.
which would have been quite harsh.
There's some wonderful adverts. I'm just looking at this. It's a shot. I can't expand it, listeners. So I'm going with the biggest headlines I can find. There's a wonderful advert for Clark's world-famed blood mixture. Purifies your blood. God knows what was in this stuff. Thousands of testimonials for having your blood purified with Clark's blood of life. It's called. God knows what was in that. But the other thing I can see here is a match, like a preview between Bloomfield. This is in the Woolwich League Alliance. Match between Bloomfield and the Jolly Boys 11. The Jolly Boys looks like something else. Only Fools and Horses.
Definitely.
That's the Woolwich Gazette, 1895.
Achtung, Millwall.
But we move along, Neil, on this show. We've gone from the past, but we're going to come forward to another game that I was at. Wonderful moment. It was like the preliminary to the most wonderful moments in Millwall history. This is a 2-0 win for Millwall over Stoke City, dated April the 30th, 1988, in front of 12,600 at Coldblow Lane. Wonderful day. It would lead us on. Probably the first moment I remember in the promotion season where it suddenly dawned on me that this shit was getting real, you know. Until this win over Stoke in 1988, it all seemed a bit like a fancy, like it didn't happen really at Millwall, or something would go wrong. But we beat Stoke this day. I think it was. I'm just trying to find the Millwall history site to tell you who scored the goals this day.
Teddy Sheringham scored on 51 minutes and Kevin O'Callaghan scored a penalty on 63.
There you go. So 2-0 win, Teddy and Callie. And I think it was this moment, I remember it as being the moment where I thought, wow, we really are in with a chance of going up.
Yeah, well, Millwall fans, we dreamed, didn't we, in 70, 71?
Yeah.
Or 71, 72, sorry.
Yeah.
When we came within minutes of getting in the first division. We hadn't ever played in the top flight, had we?
No.
And it just seemed as if Millwall were never going to play in there.
No, I mean, we just looking at the results prior to this game. I mean, we'd won at Leeds 2-1, great win away. But I think there was always a sense. Well, this is a personal reaction to it, but there was always a sense of like a cup tie quality to us. You know, every game felt like a slight FA Cup game, and we were kind of not quite clinging on by the skin of our teeth, but there was always a, you know, it could all go wrong sense, or it could all come to an end and abruptly.
Yeah, it's a natural Millwall pessimism, isn't it? That that things aren't going to go well all of the time, and you just wait. You're just waiting for something to go tits up, aren't you?
Well, we were top. I'm just looking at the position. I mean, we were top of the table coming into this game. This 2-0 win that we're talking about, but we had a fairly strong pack chasing us. But this game put us in a position where a win at Hull City, I think we would be promoted if we won at Hull City. But little did I know, as we left the den after this win, but results were combined to make us champions at Hull City, and that was I just settled for promotion, not winning the thing, you know.
Yeah, but it's always going to be that way, isn't it? That you don't want to get too carried away because you don't trust it, as you said.
No,
the great Millwall team: Brian Horn, Keith Stevens, Nicky Coleman, Terry Hurlock.
It's a classic side. Yeah.
Alan McCleary, Jimmy Carter, who was in his pomp. Les
yeah.
Brearley. Also, Les Brearley, who was our captain. Brearley, I don't know where that came from. Teddy Sheringham, Tony Cascarino, Kevin O'Callaghan. That's one hell of a team.
It's an incredible. It's an iconic side, and to have been alive in those days was a privilege. And I just chose this. It was quite hard to find any remarkable results against Stoke, but I went for this because it remains one of my memories that I'll take to the rest of my days. This 2-0 win, because I remember distinctly it just dawning on me that wow, this thing is real. A few more points and we are promoted and we're into Division 1, and that was unbelievable.
Yeah, was it Sean Ryder that once said, "If you can remember the late 80s, you clearly weren't
there." I was there. I can remember large chunks of it, but I'm not Sean Ryder. And we would finish indeed champions that season with a 4-point spread over Aston Villa, and I think that was the bit that really took my breath away, because even with our last day on the beer week loss at home to Blackburn, we still finished up 4 points in front of Aston Villa. Wonderful days. I wanted to pick out, if I may, Neil, our manager, John Docherty, Millwall's greatest manager. And I always think it's slightly remarkable that comparatively little is known about him. He was not a personality manager in a conventional sense at the Den, was he, John Docherty?
No, he was an old school manager, wasn't he? Scotsman. Who had his playing career wasn't really that. In fact, funnily enough, he started off at St Riox, is it, in Glasgow?
St Roch. I don't know how you pronounce that.
Then played for Brentford and went to Sheffield United. Didn't really pull up any trees there.
No.
Played in the first division. Dropped back down to Brentford again. Division 3, Division 4. Didn't really do anything.
No.
Went to Reading. Then went back to Brentford for a third time. Actually played in one of their more memorable teams that won promotion in 71-72.
Third place promotion with 4th division Brentford.
Then finished at QPR, which I think quite a lot of people did back then.
No, it was showing us 0 appearances for QPR. And that was his playing career. I mean, 317 playing appearances, mostly in the lower leagues. Brentford then and Reading were 3rd and 4th division fodder. Both have become more than what they were back then in their different ways. But yeah, I think probably a journeyman lower league player of his time. There's nothing to hint that he would achieve success as a manager.
A bit of a journeyman manager as well.
Oh yeah, I mean,
he reached us.
Brentford and Cambridge, but nothing much to report from either. And he actually was with us for a couple of years prior to the successful season. He came in just after George Graham left us, didn't he?
Yeah, I think he won a promotion with Cambridge in 78. He took over as manager towards the end of that promotion winning season.
Absolutely.
And a steady manager. You look at his position at Cambridge, weren't any great shakes, but he got them into Division 2. They finished 12th, 8th, 13th, 14th, 12th. Got relegated, which he left midway through a relegation campaign, which must have had a small budget, and wound up at Millwall in July.
Wound up at Millwall is probably a good way to put it, because I think there was a general sense of loss when George Graham moved on. He had been saved us from near extinction when we nearly were relegated to the 4th division, and then got us promoted in difficult times after the Luton incidents in 84.
He steadied the ship, Graham. Graham actually laid the foundations for promotion success for the greatest day in the club's history. Is somebody else who doesn't really get the credit that he deserves. This is a recurring theme, I think. I think we ought to rename this show Neil and Nick's Didn't Get the Credit That They Really Deserved show.
Well, I hope that by doing these kinds of shows, it's as much as you can do in this life is to try and put in what you hope, give the recognition to those that you should hopefully get it. And I'm hoping that these podcasts can go some way towards, achieving that. With George Graham's a very good point, Neil, and John Docherty certainly. I mean, he isn't a well-known character. He was an old school manager, and even as a fan in the 87, 88, 89 season, apart from the programme notes, you didn't really see much or hear of him, did you? You know, it wasn't that kind of time in terms of projection. It's not social media then.
Yeah, no, he'd popped up in the South London press on Tuesdays and Fridays, was it still?
That was it.
I think it probably was.
Yeah.
Done the media. He'd obviously been in the national papers, but nothing great. Because let's face it, Millwall have never really got much press except when it's bad press. Yeah, but let's be quite frank about it.
Let's cut to the chase. No, unless there's trouble at the den, no one's really interested.
Exactly, and he was probably. I don't know how Millwall thought what kind of job he was going to do when he took over. Was he a steady pair of hands? He inherited the makings of a good squad, didn't he? And obviously
he did, and he built upon it. I mean, brought some good players in. I mean, you know, some of the classic names there. I mean, Carter came in, I think, under his stewardship, and obviously he brought through players that had been there from under Graham, such as Sheringham. But bringing Cascarino, I mean, there was a sense, I remember well, the sense of genuine excitement when Cascarino and I think George Lawrence signed with us, in the kind of summer of '87, which would lead us in the end to promotion that season.
Yeah, we talk about unsung characters, and one of those great unsung characters who would have signed a lot of those players, especially the younger ones, was Bob Pearson.
Yeah, one of the lesser known names. Yeah, absolutely. Behind the scenes, man.
Yeah, it was chief scout, youth team, whatever.
Yeah,
for many years. Doesn't quite get the recognition. Again, it's a recurring theme. Doesn't quite get the recognition that he deserves. I know that he probably outstayed his welcome by about a decade, which is
it's the Millwall way.
Yeah, but he was actually Perfetus's advisor, wasn't he, for quite a long time?
Oh, it's the Millwall way to outstay your welcome and go stale. But there we are. But no, John Docherty. I mean, you're right. You know, an average playing career, a fairly average, if you want, managerial career, apart from the one shining city on a hill that was Millwall winning the second division league championship in 1987-88 and getting promoted to the first division for the first time in its history. And for both of the seasons that it was under his management in the top flight, we went top of the league at least once in those two seasons. So, you know, that remains for anyone that lived through it the high point of your Millwall life. More than winning, not winning the cup, but getting to the cup final and then playing in Europe. Those were great, but this remains the moment of possibly can never be touched.
Planned, wasn't it? This was, I think, it would only now be surpassed if we actually got into the Premier League and managed to stay there possibly a year or two. Yeah,
and then qualify for the European Conference League or
something like that. Yeah, which in Millwall. Yeah, well, you know what Millwall are like.
It would last about one game before we got thrown out of the competition.
Yeah, we'll probably close the Premier League if we ever got something up there.
Oh dear, there we are.
But we are. Yeah, but it's the pinnacle of Millwall history. It's the greatest single success in Millwall history, the greatest season in Millwall history, some of the greatest players in Millwall history.
Absolutely. It's superlative on superlative. John Docherty, he's still with us, born in 1940. His Wikipedia page says he now lives in retirement in Wiltshire, born in 19, so he's aged 81. So if you're listening, John, you're very good health, mate, and thank you for everything you've done for the Lions.
Achtung, Millwall.
Last but not least, Neil, I've chosen a historic fixture. Mill versus Huddersfield Town. This one's from 1927. This was an FA Cup game, 3-1 win for the Lions from 1927, featuring some players that are, again, you know, the same point that we've made a few times. Some of these players are lesser known in modern terms, but more wonderful players. This is a great Mill side that will go on to become a greater Mill side the following season. 1926-27 side. This is a 3-1 win for the Lions. An extraordinary collapse of Huddersfield Town, it says here in the Athletic News, dated the 8th of January 1927. I won't read it all, but it says there was no mistaking the superiority of Millwall in their encounter with the league champions of England at New Cross. They won it by 3-1, but that margin does not adequately represent their supremacy. They excelled in every department of the game and took command of it in a way that was not to be denied. Wonderful report. And goals, I think, for Richard Parker, who's or Dick Parker, as he's listed on Wikipedia. I've just picked him out to review. But that's quite a result there. And 3-1 over the league champions of England, Huddersfield. A great team. I think hadn't they won it 3 times on the spin in the 20s under Herbert Chapman now?
Yeah, then I think they were the Bank of England team, weren't they? Or was that Arsenal? I forget now.
They were certainly up there with them, weren't they?
And then Chapman left to take over Arsenal and took 1 or 2 of the players with him. But this was a good Millwall side. Joe Lansdale in goal, Jack Fort, Dick Hill, Alf Amos, Billy Bryant, Len Graham. I think we've covered him in a couple of.
We've mentioned him.
Shows,
yeah.
George Chance, Archie Gom, Parker, Wilf Pee Wee Phillips, and Alf Black. So 1 or 2 England internationals in there. Hill certainly was an international. Bryant was a very, very good amateur in his day. I think signed from Clapton or somewhere like that.
Right.
Was certainly an England amateur international. I believe he actually won full England caps as well. Len Graham.
Goals for Brown, and then Gom and Black. That's Mill's third goal came from a fine movement. Black finally sending it across, which cannoned off the post into the net. And the journalist that covered the game for the Athletic News says he had never seen Millwall play a better winning game. And he's never seen Huddersfield, the league champions, to less advantage. Nice turn of phrase they used to have in those days.
Yeah, well, it happened. Yeah, we covered the game, I think, in one of our last history shows, was when the champions of England last pitched up at the Den.
Absolutely.
And got their backsides handed to them, Leicester City.
Yeah, this would have been the equivalent for the Lions in 1927.
Because we'd only been a Football League side for 6 or 7 years at that point.
That's right. Would have been a huge crowd there at the Den.
35,962.
35,000. The capacity was famously 48,000. The very idea, listeners, that you could get 48,000 people in the Den. If you've ever visited it, you'll know what I mean. Was incredible. I mean, I used to feel
health and safety was an optional extra.
We
didn't have football safety certificates and Lurch. Can you imagine Lurch would have been walking around on this day? He'd been having a stroke every 5 seconds.
35,000. I mean, the biggest crowd I was ever involved in, at the official crowd at least, would be the Liverpool game towards the end of the first season at the Coldblow Lane. And that was, I think, officially 23,500 in there, and it was packed, listeners. Honestly, I got there late for that one, and I was at the very, very back of the Coldblow Lane, because you just couldn't get through the sheer massed ranks of bodies in the Den. And it was the only time this ever happened to me. But we scored. I think we opened the scoring against Liverpool. We did lose it in the end to a great Liverpool side. But I was actually, the surge of the crowd lifted me off my feet. I've never had this before or since, where you have no control over yourself. You're carried forward. So, and I finished up actually further forward and actually in quite a nice spot. I got a good view of the game after that. I couldn't see a thing prior to that. But the idea of 35,000 in there, Neil, incredible.
Yeah, one of many out-of-body experiences experienced at Millwall for you, Nick.
Absolutely, it was. I've picked out Dick Parker because, again, to continue a theme, a player that isn't so well known nowadays. 1894 to 1969, he played for Millwall from 88 times, and he scored. Get this, listeners, 88 appearances. He scored 62 goals from 88 games.
In all competitions, I think he made 107 appearances and scored 74 goals, which isn't quite as good. So we will stick with yours.
This is from Wikipedia. Sometimes I'm a little bit wary of Wikipedia's stats. But anyway, it's got it laid out in a grid here, so I've got no reason.
Would you like to know some more about Mr. Parker?
Yeah, I would love to.
He was the Army's lightweight boxing champion.
Wow.
And was actually spotted when serving in France with the Northumberland Fusiliers, and went straight into Sunderland's First Division side. It's a shame we didn't ask Mark Metcalf on one of our other shows.
That's right, yeah.
Otherwise, he'd have probably still been talking about him.
To cut that.
He still holds the club's goal-scoring record of 37 goals in 1927.
Wow.
But apparently, he's we talk about recurring themes.
Yeah.
Relations with the club's directors were not cordial.
There's nothing new. One of the first things I was ever told when I started work, listeners, back in 1977, so I had a really old character who used to run a cinema, and now he's finished up working for the civil service. And I remember him saying to me, well, and I didn't really know what he meant, but as my life has gone along, I now know what he meant. Robbie, his name was. He said, Nick, he had this little pencil thin moustache. He said, Nick, there is nothing new in this life. And I thought, I don't know what you're talking about. But now, here I am at the age of 60. I know exactly what Robbie was talking about. There is nothing new in this life, Neil, was there?
No, and he actually left early in our title winning campaign, the previous or the following season, which went to Watford for $4,000.
Yeah, I mean, he must have fallen out badly. I don't know what kind of fee that would be in modern terms, but to lose a striker capable of scoring in 88 league games, 62 goals, you wouldn't do that lightly. But this would be under the management of Bob Hunter, Neil, wouldn't it? At this time, the great Bob Hunter, the greatest manager, arguably, apart from John Docherty, perhaps.
Probably one of the greatest servants the club's ever had. Certainly, we talk about Bob Pearson bringing people through. Bob Hunter was an unbelievable figure in the early years of Millwall history. A Scotsman
and a rugged individual
who would famously disappear off up to Scotland at the end of every season, up towards his Montrose Arbroath kind of way, and would return with 3 or 4 signings for us.
Absolutely.
Because obviously he was a Scotsman, and we still had a strong link with the area. Of course, all of our early years, there's an awful lot of Scotsmen who played for Millwall. But Bob Hunter, I think, did we ever do a history show on him previously?
We did, and I can stick the link because we covered that in one of our Millwall history shows. Very interesting character, Neil.
Definitely worth a revisit, and if anybody
see what we can do with it.
Listen to certainly to that one, because Bob Hunter was a fascinating character, somebody that served us for donkey's years.
I mean, the size of his task here. I mean, we've mentioned Dick Parker's overall stats, but 1926-27, the season of this particular fixture, he made 40 appearances in the 3rd Division South and scored 37 goals, but then released for whatever reason by the Millwall hierarchy. So the task of the manager to replace a 37 league goal striker, which would stretch any manager, well, Bob Hunter did. The following season, 1927-28, which we go on to, I think, to win the 3rd Division South Championship, Neil, replace a 38-goal striker. Okay, so he brings in the Landells, who scores 33, Jack Cock, we've mentioned previously, with 26 goals, and Phillips, who scores 27 goals. Have that.
Yeah, funnily enough, you were just asking about how much £4,000 would have been.
Yeah.
So it would have been the equivalent of 256,700.
Okay.
Sorry, £977.78.
So a decent fee.
Inflation of average 4.6 a year. That's according to the Bank of England website.
Well, we've got to trust.
You can tell that we're making this up on the hoof, really.
Yeah. I'll edit that so it sounds like it's so super smooth that he would go on to play for Watford after he left Millwall. Not with anything. We
Yeah, we only spent one season there.
Yeah.
Returned to his native northeast, Redcar, I believe. And
that was that. Dick Parker, one of Millwall's great players, actually. And this is a great chance just to mention these kinds of players. I think that they should be memorialised in a better way than I think sometimes the club does an okay job. I think the ground should reflect some of these names we've mentioned, Voisey and Bob Hunter and others. I think more should be known about these players. But there we are, dear listeners. That's the last of the October fixtures, Millwall versus Huddersfield. Great little show. I quite enjoy doing these, Neil. They give a chance to two old gits to waffle about the olden days, doesn't it?
Yeah, as my son says, two boomers.
Okay, boomer.
Yeah, but we're boomers. But we might not make much sense. We might go off on a tangent.
That's what it's all about. The tangents are where the joy lies.
But it's actually an hour's good listening, I think.
I hope so.
Yeah, it's probably a little bit less by the time you edit out one or two remarks that we'll make.
I hope you enjoy listening to it, dear listener. We're not going to stop doing it, even if you don't. So get used to it.
Yeah, but we're in for the long run here.
Mate, aren't we just?
Yeah, well, I didn't sign for you from a rival podcast for us to stop after 3 months.
For a £4,000 deal, like Clark. The equivalent
packet of fruit pastels.
In 100 years' time, that'll be worth $250,000. Lovely stuff. There we are. That's the end of Millwall History Hour with Neil and Nick. I hope you enjoyed listening to it, dear listeners. Big thank you to Neil for joining me.
Thank you very much indeed, mate. And we will be back at some point with one or two other Nick and Neil's or Neil and Nick's History Hours.
Late October, ready for November, and the old nights are drawing in. So
yeah, and there'll be one or two other little specials that we've got planned, and one or two ideas, one or two books to promote. Hint, hint.
That's great stuff. Big thank you, dear listeners. Thank you for tuning in. Join us again for the next show in due course. Until then, bye for now.
Thank you for listening to Achtung Millwall. If you enjoyed the show, please go over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a cheeky little review. Arrivederci Millwall. Till next time.
Who do you want to watch?